The old cabin stood at the edge of the boreal forest, where the last stunted spruce trees surrendered to the endless white of the tundra beyond. It was a place between worlds, where the shelter of timber met the raw exposure of open ice. Nanook, an elder whose weathered face told the story of 70 winters in the Arctic, had reached this waypoint just as the sun began its brief winter arc across the southern horizon. He was not alone. Padding silently beside him was a Maruk, a wolf with silver-tipped fur and eyes that held the same ancient knowledge as the man who walked with him. This was not a pet. This was a relationship forged over 3 seasons, born from a chance encounter when Nanook had found the young wolf caught in the collapse of an old fox den, its leg twisted beneath frozen earth. Where others might have seen danger or an opportunity for a pelt, Nanook saw a fellow survivor of the harsh land. He had carefully freed the animal, splinted the injured limb with willow branches and strips of caribou hide, and fed it scraps of dried fish. The wolf had not run when it healed. It had returned. And so began a partnership that defied the usual boundaries between human and wild, bound by mutual respect and an understanding that transcended language. The cabin itself was a relic of the old trading days, built by trappers decades ago from spruce logs chinked with moss and clay. Its single room held a rusted iron stove, a plank bench, and little else. But to Nanook, it represented salvation. He had been traveling to visit his daughter in the settlement 3 days' journey to the east, onto following trap lines and hunting trails he had known since boyhood. The journey was routine, but the Arctic has no patience for routine. The wind had shifted that morning, bringing with it the metallic taste of approaching weather. The sky had taken on that peculiar yellow-gray quality that every Arctic dweller learns to read like a printed warning. A major storm was coming, and it was coming fast. Nanook pushed open the cabin door, its leather hinges cracking in the cold. Inside, the temperature was perhaps only 10 degrees warmer than outside, but the absence of wind made it feel like a different world. Amaruk entered behind him, shaking ice crystals from its thick coat, each movement releasing small clouds of frozen vapor into the dim interior. The wolf immediately began circling the space, nostrils flaring, cataloging every scent and shadow with the thoroughness of a creature whose survival has always depended on knowing its environment completely. The first task was fire. Without heat, this cabin was merely a wooden coffin that would delay death by freezing rather than prevent it. Nanook moved with the efficient economy of motion that defines those who have lived their entire lives in a place where wasted effort can mean death. He examined the stove, checking that the chimney pipe was clear, that no ice had blocked the flue. Then he turned his attention to fuel. The previous occupants had left a small stack of split wood beside the stove, but it was damp from years of temperature fluctuations, causing condensation to form and freeze. Damp wood would produce more smoke than heat, and in a confined space, smoke could be as deadly as the cold. Nanook knew he needed kindling, the fine, dry material that would catch from a spark and burn hot enough to dry and ignite the larger pieces. He stepped back outside, Amaruk following like a shadow. The storm was closer now. The wind had picked up, carrying tiny granules of ice that stung exposed skin like thrown sand. The light was fading, though it was barely mid-afternoon. Above, the clouds had merged into a solid gray ceiling that seemed to press down on the world. Nanook moved to the leeward side of the cabin, where a few dead spruce branches still clung to a standing dead tree. These were perfect. The tree had died standing, so its wood had dried in the air rather than rotting on the ground. He broke off several branches, each snap echoing in the heavy pre-storm silence. Returning inside, Nanook used his knife to shave thin curls from the driest branch. This was not a modern knife, but an ulu with a curved blade, the traditional cutting tool of his people. The blade had been resharpened so many times over the decades that its original shape had transformed, but it remained sharp enough to produce paper-thin wood shavings that curled like ribbons into his cupped hand. These shavings were the foundation of fire. He arranged them in the stove with the care of an artist, creating a small nest with air spaces between each layer. Fire needs three things: fuel, heat, and oxygen. The novice packs kindling too tightly, smothering the flame before it can establish itself. Nanook built his foundation loose, so then added progressively larger pieces in a careful architecture that would allow the flames to climb while drawing air from below. For ignition, he did not use matches. Matches fail in extreme cold, and the moisture from breath or snow renders them useless. Instead, Nanook carried a ferro rod, a tool of ferrocerium that produces sparks hot enough to ignite tinder even in the most hostile conditions. He struck the rod with the back of his knife blade, directing the cascade of orange sparks into the nest of wood shavings. The first attempt produced sparks, but no flame. The second sent a spark into the perfect spot, where it glowed red for a heartbeat before the first tendril of smoke appeared. Nanook leaned close, breathing gently on the ember, feeding it oxygen without overwhelming it with moisture from his breath. The smoke thickened, and then, with a whisper rather than a roar, flame appeared. He continued to feed the growing fire with increasingly larger pieces of wood, monitoring the color of the flames. Yellow flames indicate incomplete combustion and wasted heat. Blue flames mean efficient burning. As the fire established itself, he began adding the damp wood from the cabin store, placing it close to the stove, where radiant heat would drive out the moisture before the pieces were needed for fuel. With fire secured, Nanook turned to the next priority: water. The human body loses water constantly through respiration and metabolic processes, even in extreme cold. Dehydration in winter is insidious because the absence of sweat creates the illusion that water is unnecessary. But a dehydrated person cannot generate body heat efficiently, and confusion from dehydration has killed as many Arctic travelers as the cold itself. He filled his kettle, a battered aluminum pot blackened from countless fires, with clean snow collected from outside. Not just any snow would do. He avoided the surface layer, which could contain wind-blown dirt and animal waste. He avoided the bottom layer, which often contained gravel and debris. He gathered the middle section of a pristine drift, compressing it into the pot. Snow is mostly air, so he had to pack it tightly and add more as the first layer melted. The process took time. Ice would have been more efficient, requiring less fuel to melt, but ice meant venturing to the frozen creek or chopping through the cabin's waterhole. And with the storm now beginning in earnest, such travel was unwise. Amarook had settled near the stove, close enough to feel the growing warmth, but not so close as to be uncomfortable. The wolf's presence was companionable rather than needy. It groomed its paws, biting away the ice balls that formed between its toes, a constant maintenance task for any creature traveling in deep cold. Wolves are better adapted to Arctic conditions than humans in many ways. Their double coat, with dense underfur beneath longer guard hairs, creates insulation superior to most modern synthetic materials. Their paws are naturally insulated, with thick pads and a counter-current heat exchange system in their legs that keeps warm arterial blood flowing down from the body, while cold venous blood returning from the feet is pre-warmed before reaching the core. Outside, the storm arrived with the sudden intensity characteristic of Arctic weather systems. The wind transformed from a breeze to a roar in minutes. Snow began to fall, not in the gentle floating flakes of temperate winters, but in a horizontal blast of ice crystals, driven with such force that they made a hissing sound against the cabin walls. Visibility dropped to zero. The world beyond the cabin walls ceased to exist, replaced by a white chaos of wind and snow that screamed around the structure's corners and sought every gap in the walls with probing fingers of cold. Nanook listened to the storm's voice with the attention of someone who understood its language. This was a true blizzard, what his people called pirsuktuk, the kind of storm that could last 3 days and bury a man alive if he ventured even 20 paces from shelter. The wind was coming from the northeast, which meant it was pulling cold air down from the permanent ice pack. The temperature outside would be dropping rapidly, possibly reaching 40 or 50 degrees below zero when factoring in the wind chill. At such temperatures, exposed flesh freezes in minutes, and breath crystallizes into ice fog before it can disperse. He checked the cabin's integrity with the systematic thoroughness that survival demands. He examined the walls for gaps where wind could penetrate, stuffing small cracks with spare cloth from his pack. He ensured the door was tightly closed and wedged against the frame to prevent it from blowing open. He checked the stovepipe where it exited through the roof, making sure the connection was secure and that no downdrafts were forcing smoke back into the cabin. Carbon monoxide poisoning is an invisible killer, and in a space this small, even a small accumulation could be fatal. His supplies were adequate, but not abundant. He had pemmican, that concentrated mixture of dried meat, rendered fat, and berries that the Inuit and other northern peoples had perfected over millennia. A single handful provided enough calories to sustain hard travel in extreme cold. He had dried fish, frozen solid in his pack, which he now placed near the stove to thaw. He had tea, the precious commodity that had come north with traders and been adopted enthusiastically by Arctic peoples who recognized its value in providing warm hydration and a psychological boost against the relentless cold. For Amaruk, he had frozen chunks of seal meat, obtained from his last visit to the coast. Wolves are opportunistic feeders, capable of gorging when food is available and fasting when it is not. But Nanook knew the value of keeping his companion well fed. A hungry wolf was an unpredictable wolf, and more pragmatically, a well-nourished animal maintained its body heat more efficiently and could function as an effective early warning system for dangers that human senses might miss. As the storm intensified, the cabin became a tiny island of warmth and light in an ocean of frozen darkness. The iron stove glowed red in places, radiating heat that slowly raised the interior temperature above freezing. Nanook's breath, which had been visible as clouds of vapor, gradually became less visible as the air warmed. He removed his outer parka, a magnificent garment of caribou hide with the fur turned inward for maximum insulation. So the parka was cut in the traditional style, with a hood large enough to accommodate a fur ruff of wolverine, the one fur to which ice crystals from breath will not adhere. Beneath the parka, he wore multiple layers. Next to his skin was a light inner parka of caribou with the fur turned outward, creating an airspace between layers. Over his legs, he wore caribou fur pants with the fur facing inward, and over those, outer pants of windproof sealskin. His feet were encased in kamik, the traditional boots of caribou leg skin with the fur inside, lined with dried grass that served as both insulation and moisture absorption. This system of layering was not random. Each layer served a specific purpose, and together they created a microclimate that kept him alive in temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. With immediate survival secured, Nanook allowed himself to settle into the rhythm of waiting that is fundamental to Arctic life. The Inuit have never been people who conquer nature. That is the mindset of those from temperate lands, where nature can be bent to human will. In the Arctic, nature is indifferent to human presence, and survival comes not from conquest, but from accommodation, from working with the environment rather than against it. The storm would last as long as it lasted. Fighting it or resenting it was pointless. Accepting it and waiting it out was the only rational response. He prepared a simple meal, heating water for tea, and softening pemmican in the hot liquid until it became a thick, nourishing stew. The smell filled the small space, rich and meaty. He shared portions with Amaruk, who accepted the food with dignified appreciation, eating slowly and methodically. The wolf's table manners were better than many humans, a reflection perhaps of the careful relationship they had built, where neither assumed dominance, but both recognized partnership. As darkness fell completely, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew more intense. The wind's roar became a constant presence, like the sound of a distant waterfall. The cabin walls creaked and groaned under the pressure of wind gusts that must have exceeded 60 miles per hour. Snow forced its way through microscopic gaps, forming small drifts on the floor beneath the door and around the window frame. Nanook swept these away periodically, knowing that allowed to accumulate, They would melt when the cabin warmed and create pools of water that would refreeze when the stove went cold. The night passed in segments marked by stove feedings. Every 2 hours, Nanook woke and added wood to maintain the fire. This was not optional. If the fire died, the temperature inside would plummet to match the outside within an hour, and rekindling a fire with frozen hands in complete darkness was a scenario he preferred to avoid. Amaruk slept with the deep rest of a creature secure in its environment, occasionally twitching as canine dreams played out behind closed eyes. By morning, the storm had reached its peak fury. The cabin was now half buried in snowdrifts on the windward side. The door was completely blocked, sealed by snow packed so tightly it might as well have been ice. Nanook was not concerned. He had been in such situations before. The cabin had a small window on the leeward side, and if necessary, he could exit through that. But there was no need to leave. His wood supply would last another 2 days if he was careful. His food would last 4. The storm would exhaust itself before his supplies ran out. What concerned him more was the structural integrity of the roof. He could hear the weight of accumulated snow pressing down on the timbers. Periodically, he tapped the ceiling with the handle of his ulu, listening to the sound. A solid thunk meant the roof was holding. A muffled thud would indicate dangerous accumulation. So far, the sounds remained reassuring, but he monitored them constantly. The second day brought no relief. The wind continued its assault, and the snow fell with undiminished intensity, and the world had contracted to the dimensions of the cabin's interior, a space perhaps 12 feet by 12 feet that contained the entirety of existence. Nanook used the time as he used all time, purposefully. He repaired a tear in his pack using sinew thread and an awl made from bone. He resharpened his ulu on a whetstone he carried for this purpose, testing the edge against the hair on his arm until it could shave cleanly. He checked every piece of his gear, identifying anything that needed maintenance or replacement. Amaruk became restless on the second day, pacing the small space and whining occasionally at the door. Wolves are not den animals by preference. They are creatures of vast territories, accustomed to ranging across miles in a single day. Being confined was contrary to the wolf's nature. Nanook spoke to the animal in soft tones, using a mixture of English, Inuktitut, and the wordless sounds that had become their private language. He could not explain the concept of weather or safety to a wolf, but his calm presence seemed to provide reassurance. On the evening of the second day, the wind began to diminish. The change was subtle at first, a slight reduction in the constant roar, a few seconds of relative quiet between gusts. By midnight, the storm's voice had dropped from a roar to a howl, and by dawn of the third day, to a moan. When morning light finally penetrated the snow-covered window, it revealed a transformed landscape. Nanook carefully opened the leeward window and climbed out into a world made new. The storm had sculpted the snow into fantastic shapes, while creating drifts that towered 15 feet high on one side of the cabin, while leaving bare ground scoured clean on the other. The air was crystalline clear, so clean it almost hurt to breathe. The temperature had dropped further in the storm's wake, as it always does when winds cease and clear skies allow heat to radiate away into space. Nanook estimated it was now close to 50 below zero, cold enough that his breath froze with an audible crackle. He broke trail around the cabin, his legs plunging thigh-deep into the soft new snow with each step. The physical effort was immense, each step requiring him to lift his entire leg out of the snow and place it forward for the next plunge. After completing a circuit of the cabin, he was breathing hard, vapor clouds streaming from his mouth and nostrils. But the trail was broken, and Amaruk could follow in his footsteps, the wolf's lighter weight and wide paws allowing it to bound through the trench he had created. They stood together in the pristine silence that follows a great storm, man and wolf, survivors of an event that would have killed the unprepared. The sun was rising, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, a raven called, the first sound of life beyond their own breathing. The world was still dangerous. The journey ahead remained challenging, but they had endured the storm through preparation, knowledge, and respect for the power of the Arctic environment. Nanook looked down at Amaruk, and the wolf looked back with those ancient eyes. No words were needed. They understood each other in the way that survivors always do. When they had faced the fury of the North together and emerged stronger for it. Soon they would continue their journey, but for this moment, they simply stood in acknowledgement of what they had accomplished. They had not conquered the storm. They had done something harder and more important. They had survived it with wisdom rather than force, and in doing so, honored the old ways that had kept his people alive in this unforgiving land for thousands of years.